Sure. Sure. Everything with Everett on Google Podcasts. Here's where you left off.
Welcome to a brand new podcast. This is Everything with Everett, a podcast dedicated to hosting important conversations. Everything with Everett is hosted by Everett McConaughey from Boise, Idaho. Everett is an Idaho native who is ready to share his thoughts and observations on a wide variety of subjects. Politics, science, faith, religion, technology, and so much in between. How did we get here? What can we learn from each other? How can we put the past into a healthy conversation that helps us grow tomorrow? This is Everything with Everett, a conversation worth having. Hello, happy Wednesday to everybody. I honestly didn't think that this podcast would be happening this week due to a major technical malfunction that happened yesterday afternoon at my hands. I was attempting to upgrade the firmware on my recording console and something happened, and I was assuming it was a brick because it wouldn't change. Anyway, after hours of online research and digging and a few downloads, I was able to get everything back online, and now I'm coming to you in a recording. Yay! So today I would like to talk about the COVID-19 situation, going back to school, as well as some shame and systemic stigma that we experience in society, and kind of how at least one generation seems to be perpetuating a lot of that. A few weeks ago, I saw a picture shared on Facebook. The picture is a classroom with 4 desks, and in between the desks is a homemade divider. Under the photo, there's a caption that says, "Not sure if teacher friends need ideas, but," and then it ends with hands in the air shrugging emoji. The caption then goes on to say, "She used PVC pipe and clear plastic shower curtains from the dollar store, costing around $100 to do her room." Well, this is an awesome idea. Why do these discussions fall on the teachers to finance these innovations? Why is it up to the teachers to protect our children in the time of a national pandemic? Where's the district response in this? We all know that district funding and school funding is not what it should be. So to ask them to do all these things and protect our children, I get why it's not happening, because it's just, there's no money for it. They would have to cut some teacher salaries, which are already abysmally small. Teachers are really important to our society, simply for the fact that we wouldn't have anyone outside of a teacher in our society if they didn't exist. We wouldn't have presidents, we wouldn't have doctors. They are literally the foundation of a well-rounded childhood and adult. So continuing on, I don't think our value teachers who have in some cases become local community icons should have their lives placed in danger to teach children. I think that there's a legitimate claim that parents cannot afford to stay at home and teach their children or pay for childcare. But that is the conversation that needs to be happening. Why are people being forced to choose between work or family? Why can't 2 working parents afford childcare? Why are our wages so stagnant, but our elected officials don't have a worry in the world? Our nation refuses to acknowledge the health and life are not part of the profit and tax system that we've built for generations. America is an antiquated economic machine. What is the federal government doing for COVID-19? I'd say it's doing almost nothing. Why has the president and top U.S. officials refused to see the data from around the world, in New York and across America, and implemented a unified and national narrative? We can't even agree on masks. And for the record, no one's saying that masks keep you from catching the virus. So if you think that's what's being said, you're not listening. Masks keep others from giving a virus that potentially is in their body to you. So masks do save you, but your mask on your face doesn't save you. The mask on your face saves the person next to you, and vice versa. I think that part of the other issue is people aren't hearing what's actually being said and discussed. I think that with this whole school thing, people are hearing, oh, the liberals, the Democrats don't want to have a school year this year. Our children need to be educated. Yes, children need to be educated. No one is saying that we should just be sitting around lounging for the rest of the year, wait for this thing to blow over. Kids do need to be educated. And parents are part of that educational process. We just need to be smart about it because there's a pandemic that could cost lives. Why does your individual right to have your child educated or to not wear a mask mean that somebody else's life is less valuable? And you might argue, oh, well, then they don't have to teach. They can quit and they can find another job. Again, why should somebody else's life be inconvenienced for yours? Our country was founded on the principle of being a great social society and being inconvenienced by each other, doing what was best for the greater good at maybe a little bit of a personal cost to us. Why do the governors have to mandate the stay-at-home requests? Why do the county level health officials have to be the bad guy and recommend closing businesses and schools? Why do grocery store workers have to wear masks for months and meet employer health screenings, yet customers can come and go with none of the screening measures in place? And for a while, they weren't even truly counting people going into stores. Just yesterday, 6 months into this thing, I had my first experience where I went to a store and they said, we're at capacity, you need to wait out here. And there was literally a line outside the store for people wanting to go in. And you had to have a mask. And once one person walked out, one person went in. And it went that way till we all got to go inside. This stuff should have been happening back in February and March. And the governments don't want to do anything. Nobody wants to be the record of saying, hey, everyone's health matters, let's do this. Governor Cuomo did quite a bit and was really looked highly upon for his narrative in the whole situation. A lot of what we know, how to handle this, prevent it, get on top of this, came out of New York. And yet now it's happening across the country and no one's doing anything that New York did. We pay so much in local and federal taxes, yet all of us who make less than $150,000 a year are having to carry the cash palaces on our backs. Our society doesn't seem to embrace the principles of a healthy life, a bright future, and the collective good that we learned our nation was founded on. So I'm going to transition over to another subject, and that is one of systemic shame and maybe hopefully encouraging some empathy for people in different situations. As I get older, I can see that we as a society judge what we fear and don't understand. Instead of educating ourselves, sorry, my phone was going off. All right, let me start over. As I get older, I can see that we as a society judge what we fear and don't understand. Instead of educating ourselves to expand our own understanding, the default seems to be that we create a bullying culture against those who don't fit into our experience. I've noticed seemingly problematic traits in different generations. Personally, my parents fall into the generation called the baby boomers. I'm going to ask Google to help define some of these terms today.
According to Wikipedia, baby boomers are the demographic cohort following the silent generation and preceding Generation X. The generation is generally defined as people born from 1946 and 1964, during the post-World War II baby boom.
The boomer generation grew up in very different times. There was a blind respect for adults and elders in the community, local or national government, and members of religious organizations that they were or were not part of. You basically didn't get to live life as you wanted if it upset mother, father, or a priest. I think many can now see that this cycle of repression and abuse, I think that many people can now see this as a cycle of repression and abuse because holding in who you really are or not saying what you feel dishonors your own life and shows that you are okay bending to someone else. I think that it also builds this system of power and abuse by those people in position because if no one questions them, they can do whatever they want. The congressmen can create loopholes for their friends, themselves, or their family members to get tax cuts and pocket tons and tons of money that you and I are paying out in taxes. They make sure that they don't have to pay their fair share. Churches are protected, and we have leaders in select churches who are abusing children. And there's so much that they are protected by thanks to our government because of separation of church and state. And they get that privilege of being clergy. You have to question people. You have to stand up for yourself. And yes, you should respect someone else for the life that they live, but not the title that they hold. Now, if you're someone who thrives by putting yourself second to a patriarchy, for those that don't know, that is a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. An example is the thematic relationships of a ballad, that's a narrative or story, are worked out according to the conventional archetypes, typical example, of the patriarchy. So if you're someone who thrives by putting yourself second to the patriarchy, then I can see why there is frustration today when Gen X...
Here's the definition of Generation X. The generation born after that of the baby boomers, roughly from the early 1960s to late 1970s, typically perceived to be disaffected and directionless.
Generation Y or millennials.
According to Wikipedia, millennials, also known as Generation Y, are the demographic cohort following Generation X and preceding Generation Z. Researchers and popular media use the early 1980s as starting birth years and the mid-1990s to early 2000s as ending birth years, with 1981 to 1996 a widely accepted defining range for the generation.
And Generation Z.
Here's the definition of Generation Z. the generation reaching adulthood in the second decade of the 21st century, perceived as being familiar with the internet from a very young age.
So I can see why there's frustration when all those generations don't stop questioning your actions and rhetoric. The boomer generation is in or approaching retirement, and they were raised to be treated like their grandparents were in this stage of life. So I guess maybe they're a little bit disappointed that we're not just blindly going, oh, you're an elder. You should be unquestioned, unchallenged. This world needs to be built to your liking. Pretty sure that they turn around and call people who have that kind of mindset snowflakes. Very self-describing, I would say. I want to thank Google for the assistance. My Google Home was very instrumental in recording these bits.
When the team at Google finds out I'm being helpful, they're going to be so proud.
Yeah, we know. So life moves forward, and it is not a museum. Meaning that life is not a place where objects of historical, scientific, artistic, or cultural interest are stored or exhibited. Life is not static, in that it is lacking movement or action or change, especially in a way viewed as undesirable or uninteresting. So if you feel like life should be the way that it was in the 70s or 60s, you don't live in reality. It's okay to hang on to the things from the past. It's okay to have preferences. Maybe you do appreciate a more simpler time. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you do you inside of your home. And it can be the nicest boomer menagerie museum, static mid-century modern home, whatever you'd like, while the rest of the world continues on. This leads me into some systemic stigma. Stigma or shame is defined as a mark of disgrace associated with particular circumstances, quality, or person. Some examples. The stigma of having gone to prison will always be with someone. Another example is that debt has lost the stigma and is now part of everyday life. We used to imprison people in what was called debtor's prison for having debt. Think about that. Back in like the 1920s, 100 years ago, you could be put in jail for owing a balance to somebody else, to a company. So if we can change as a society to where that is no longer imprisonable, I'm definitely not saying it should be imprisoned. But if we can change our values to like, hey, you know what? This is an everyday situation. People can't avoid that. They need to be out working. We're not going to put them in jail. What else are we getting wrong? We need to face stigma and destroy its power over things that it shouldn't be part of. Stigma is unnecessary and a systemic abuse that can be done by family, friends, or yourself. A lot of times we can see a lot of people have, if they have an abusive parent that, tells them that they're worthless or kind of really judges other people based on certain values, then the children are going to live with that mindset. Oh, well, if you can't just go out and have the perfect little life, get that first dream job that you want, get this college degree, get that home. If any of that fails, you're a failure. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is this box mindset that you have to live to somebody else's expectations. Why do people who experience mental illness get written off as less than someone who is, quote, normal? It's worth noting that we're all created equal, and normal is or was just a setting on a washing machine. Perhaps I'm dating myself with that awesome analogy from my mom. I haven't used a real washer with those settings in almost a decade, since the apartment living I could afford has had a pay-per-load commercial washer. I'm looking forward to hopefully having my own washer this fall. I'll be 32 next month. That is the America that we live in. Why do we blame the college student for, quote, picking an expensive school and encouraging large student debt? Do we dislike doctors and nurses so much that they deserve to be straddled by debt for decades, thanks to choosing a career path that helps our society and community? If we can blame the college student for choosing their school, degree, and major, and the costs that come with it, at what point does the argument go the opposite direction? When does the single mother living in a rural Idaho farming community receive less assistance because, quote, she chose, end quote, where to live and the circumstances of her life? Granted, we don't know what those circumstances are. Maybe she got a divorce. Maybe the other half died. Maybe she would love to move to the big city, but she's stuck in a small town. When do we justifiably say that her children don't deserve an education as rigorous as the city child gets? We don't. And we need to stop shaming people for choosing paths that better themselves, their community, or their family. We need to stop this less poor versus more poor fighting that our nation has created for us to distract us from the money they are quietly seizing in the night from public funds. Why do we blame the patient? Why do we blame the victim? Is it a person with diabetes' fault that they live in a society that subsidizes cheap, highly processed, and nutritionally stripped foods? Why does it, quote, suck to be them, end quote, when the cost of insulin has been driven up in the past 10 years? In 2012, the average cost of insulin per diabetes patient was $2,864 per year. By 2016, it had risen to $5,705. Today, one vial of insulin can cost anywhere from $250 to $300. And some people need 6 vials per month. In addition to that, there are other diabetes supplies, such as a glucose monitor, test strips, lancets, and a safe place to store used syringes or pens. It could easily cost someone without insurance $1,300 per month to care for this condition. Insulin is a drug that was developed in 1921 from animals, and in the 1970s, scientists found they could use recombinant DNA to manufacture real human insulin. These human insulins, also known as regular insulin, are still in use, although starting in the 1990s, a third wave of insulin came to the scene. These analog insulins built on human insulin, but had a slight variation that makes them act more like the insulin naturally produced and regulated by the body. They're longer lasting versus the original were short acting. A 2011 World Health Organization review didn't find that analog insulins had any advantage over human insulins. The newer insulins also come at about twice the price as human insulins, which the World Health Organization said was not worth it. Since the first analog insulin was approved, Humalog, the list price of the vial has steadily increased, in step with its competitor Novolog. In the last decade, the price has gone up 300%. A vial of insulin now costs close to $300. We live in a capitalist world where profits are king. There are only 3 insulin manufacturers and countless food companies making cheap, unhealthy foods. The system is rigged by government for the pharmaceuticals and the companies that need your business. Our economy favors the rich and penalizes the poor. Couples and single parents working multiple jobs to pay bills naturally gravitate to whatever fills the stomachs of the children and yields the biggest bang for the dollar. Poor food nutrition during a child's development can create conditions that cause illness, mental instability, and a life dependent on pharmaceuticals to maintain a standard of life. Not the standard life, and not a quality life. Today's fact: ADA or handicap placards have a number that starts with an H on them. This number can be run by local law enforcement to see if it is valid, just like a license plate. So before you or someone you know judge someone who, quote, doesn't look disabled for parking in a blue parking space, remember that they are medically issued by a doctor. The driver doesn't have to be the patient. And if you are truly concerned about abuse, take it up with an entity who can set you straight. Don't harass or complain. Don't leave an anonymous note. Just take your sad, jaded life and try to enjoy the sunshine. Hit the wrong button. So, in closing, be careful of what you say. Be careful of who you share. Who are you retweeting? Who are you sharing on Facebook that isn't your own? And who you elect. Because by holding up someone else's words, you testify that they are in line with your truth. If you support politicians who demean women or brag about violating women, you're saying that women aren't worthy of respect. When a politician calls out the possible health issues like a stroke, dementia, or medication use by their candidate, voting yes, you are telling loved ones impacted by that same condition that their privacy is a joke, that you are open to ridicule them publicly, and God forbid, the person with the condition becomes you or someone you actually love or care about. Be true to yourself. Make your words match that truth. Live with no regrets by being honest with that truth. Be quick to listen for understanding and slow to speak in unjustified judgment. Thanks for joining me. It's hopefully been a conversation worth having. Won't have a full podcast next week due to time constraints, but I look forward to seeing you real soon. Thank you. You can join the conversation anytime. Call or text 208-391-2808. Also, you can connect on Twitter. Look for @Everett Podcast. Listen to all available episodes of Everything with Everett, as well as find out where to subscribe. More information at everettmcconaughey.com/podcast. Music beds used in this podcast are royalty-free and courtesy bensound.com. Podcast hosting and distribution is provided by buzzsprout.com. Thank you for listening to Everything with Everett. This was a conversation worth having.